Hello everyone, it's Silvia from Yokai Tarot. Welcome back to my channel today. This is a very special video because we are going to do a side-by-side comparison among the three of my Yokai Tarot decks. So when I'm talking about Yokai Tarot decks, the titles obviously may be different. We're looking at the indie Yokai Yochi by Bybee, which is unfortunately also out of print. And yes, it is indeed one of my favorite out of print, but in general, it is one of my favorite tarot decks of all times. I did not include this one in my video, my top 10 out of print decks, because I knew that I was going to come out with this video. And so I wanted to do something really special for this deck. Then we're going to have a look at this tarot deck in specific. This is the Italian edition of the Yokai Tarot Yokai, so Yokai Tarot. This is a mass market deck that was published, I believe, about a year ago. There's also a French version of this deck if you want to check it out. It is a mass market deck, as I said, and it's actually very affordable. And then this is the latest one of my acquisitions when it comes to yokai or yokai related tarot decks, and it's the Yokai Tarot by Marga Biazzi and Paolo Bertazzo. This is also mass market and it's a Lo Scarabeo deck. It has been released probably a couple of weeks ago. You are starting to see it available on the various, the resellers everywhere around the world. I do have to say something though about this deck. I have seen it selling for exorbitant prices. And I've had this conversation when talking about the spirit box before, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But basically, please note that this is just one of the many deluxe, let's say, decks by Lo Scarabeo. And it shouldn't cost more than, well, depending. In Italy, it's 25 euros. Obviously, that will have to be translated when it comes to currency exchanges all around the world. But this should not be costing more than probably 55, for example, Australian dollars, or maybe 30 US dollars. I obviously do not know. I live in Australia and this one retails for around 55 to 65 Australian dollars, which is, I believe, rather expensive. This is a lot more affordable. And I don't know whether this will be a video in which I will convince you to buy either deck. This one is not available, unfortunately, anymore, but sometimes you do find this available in one of the Facebook groups if you want to check it out, if you really, really love this deck. Today, the purpose of today's videos is not necessarily to go into the meaning of all of the yokais. So yokai, what is a yokai? Yokai is a creature. It's a supernatural creature that belongs to Japanese folklore, and more often than not you will see a lot of books referring to Japanese yokais. Some of those yokais have very ancient origins, and we're talking about also origins outside of Japan. Some of them come from China, some of them come from India as well. But in any case, it's always very interesting to know all of these things related to Japanese law. Japan is a country that I absolutely adore. I've been there 4 times. I'm planning to go back. They believe a lot in the supernatural, and it is often the theme behind a lot of production when it comes to, for example, literature, so fiction, but also movies. Think about all of the horror movies that come from Japan, and many of them will be based on any kind of variation of yokai, so of supernatural beings. So I really, really love it. Is part of something that I consider my passion, and I have been studying a lot of books, so I know a lot of yokais. But the reason why I am not going to go through and explain all of the 78 yokais that we're going to find into a deck is because, yes, there are 78 of them. And also, if we take into consideration that we're looking at Taroki Yokai here and Yokai Yochi here, we're going to have so many yokais to talk about that it would be impossible to fit it in a 1-hour video. And also, it is true that many of these yokais actually overlap, so we'll see a lot of kappa, for example, a lot of tanuki, a lot of kitsune in all three of these decks. But even though we won't have three decks, three full 78 cards decks to talk about, we'll still have hundreds of yokais to talk about. So what I'm going to propose here today is to literally have a side-by-side comparison. We're going to have a look whenever I will feel like explaining a few things about the yokai we're looking at, and then I'm going to do so. But if you want to know more about especially the yokais that are present in this deck here, so the yokai yochi, I will actually make sure to put in the description box below a link to one of my older videos in which I go through many of the yokais here present. And also be aware that I have been studying this deck together with my members, my Sunlight and Starlight members. And there's a lot of videos, I believe there's 4 videos, where I actually go through all of the yokais in this deck one by one, explaining what they are, their origin, what they do, whether we should be afraid of them or not. So if you want to become a member of my channel, you can do so. And there's also a link in the description box below. You'll be very welcome, and also you'll be able to see all of the videos related to all of the yokais in the Yokai Yochi. But let's have a look. Okay, so first of all, I imagine that if you're new to the world of yokai, it may feel a little bit overwhelming and daunting because there's literally hundreds. And not just that, it's just that each and every one has got a really rich story when it comes to the tradition. And there's been a lot of books studying the yokai and the impact that they have on culture, but also on everyday life. And so it is not an easy task when you want to gather some knowledge about this theme. So what I wanted to do is to talk about these decks by giving you an idea of how much information you can actually get out of the guidebooks that come with the decks. So when it comes to the Yokai Yochi, so in the edition, which is this one here on the left, this is the guidebook that comes with the deck. And as you can see, it is very similar to what we would call a little white book. So it is tiny. It doesn't have a lot of pages. It doesn't have a lot of information. However, what I do find quite interesting is that for each and every one of these cards, you will have the name spelled out in the original Japanese kanjis. And then you have the romaji, so the transliteration of the sounds of those kanji into the Western alphabet. So you will be able to read the name or know the name of the yokai the card is referring to. And then there is at least a couple of lines describing what the yokai is and what it's famous for. Some of them will have a bit more of a description, others will have a bit less. But if you notice, there's not much difference between the major arcanas and the minor arcanas. So is this, let's say, a good guidebook? I don't think so. I wouldn't say so. I would expect something with a little bit more information, but it does provide you with the basics. So this one is from the Yokai Yochi Tarot. Then we're looking at the latest deck that has come into my collection with this theme. So it's called the Yokai Tarot by Lo Scarabeo. And this one has a guidebook with the same size of any of these deluxe items from Lo Scarabeo. So as you would expect, it has a fair bit of information in English up to page... sorry, let me just go through them. So it's about here, I would say. Yeah, that's the last of it. So I was actually at the last page. So up to page 52, there's 52 or rather 50 pages of information in English. Then you do have them in Italian, but you will see that the amount of information that we get in Italian for each or every one of these cards is not exactly the same. So we do have more information on the English side. And then when it comes to other languages, we also have Spanish here and Portuguese. And I believe that's actually it. Yes, indeed. So obviously the most you will get is from the English pages, and when it comes to the information that we get, it's actually not bad, because not only we will see for each and every one of the cards the keywords that we got, and also it will talk about the specific yokai. It will tell you the name in Romaji, so you'll be able to read it and know how to pronounce it, and also there will be the name in kanji. And also it gives you a little bit of information when it comes to the specifics of the yokai itself. And I don't think that, well, only with the keywords you'll be able to relate the particular yokai to the meaning of the card in tarot. And this one is not just for the major arcanas, but also for the minor arcana. So as you can see, we got more or less the same amount of information for both the major and the minors, which is, to be honest with you, it is rather good. I would think that, you know, they pack a lot of information as much as they can on these guidebooks. Obviously, the font is very small, but it is still readable. So I would say that for a mass market product, this is actually fine, and this is probably what we would expect. However, when it comes to this deck, which is also mass market, and the Italian version is produced or released by Nui Nui, this one is actually a really good book, and I found that when I was doing these videos with my members, comparing the Yokai Yochi and this tarot deck, I was actually comparing card by card, and we were actually together saying, okay, for the Queen of Swords, I actually prefer this deck rather than this deck because I believe that the image of the yokai chosen is better in this one, and so on and so forth. So this means that when it comes to the information here, of course, this is obviously in Italian. So as I said, there is a French edition and Italian edition as well. I do not know. It is not known whether there is an English edition of this deck or whether it will come or not. If you speak Italian or French, or if you are comfortable with using Google Translate, for example, I highly recommend this deck in specific because A, it's more affordable than the other two. B, it's also coming with a really good guidebook. And also, when it comes to confronting the way in which the specific yokais have been chosen between these two decks, I was agreeing with all of my members, and we ultimately prefer this deck here because it feels like the references are more apt to describe the meaning of the card. But I will let you judge it yourself if you get this deck. Obviously, this is rather a lot of information. It does talk about the yokai in specific. It tells you a little bit about the story of the yokai. It tells you a little bit about the divination related to this card, when it comes upright, when it comes reversed, and I believe that's it, yes. So it is rather good. I would say it is rather good, and it's also, you have to keep in mind that aesthetics, if are important for you, of course, we're looking at different aesthetics here, but let me just zoom in a little bit because otherwise we won't be seeing the cards properly. This one is a deck that comes full color, so you have the whole entire color gamut. When it comes to the color palette, then you have this one, which is the Lo Scarabeo deck, also mass market, which has a rather limited choice on color palette. And when it comes to Yokai Yochi, which is the indie deck, it's actually really limited in color palette. It's almost monochromatic. I'm not saying anything with that. As a matter of fact, I adore this deck, so it doesn't really matter for me. But if aesthetics are important, you might want to consider that. Now, let's flip them all and let's have a look at the cards one by one. And as I said, when I will be able to make a comment on the yokais themselves, then I will do so. Otherwise, you know, it's impossible, at least for me, it is impossible to retain information on all of the yokais. It's a monumental effort. And I honestly don't think it's necessary because we do have a lot of possibilities to do some kind of research on these. But you will see that many of them repeat themselves, and obviously, and also, as I said, there is one video which is free to subscribers, and there's a bunch of videos that are for members that if you want to join the members, you'll be able to visualize them, to watch them as well. So we start obviously with the full. Obviously, the names on this one are in Italian, but you'll be able to go with the other names. Obviously, these ones are also in English, and these ones too. When it comes to the cardstock, I have to say these two are very similar, very papery, but this one has a very soft linen finish, very luxurious. This one is just papery, but it feels very sturdy. It's got a really good bounce to it, and it feels like a very sturdy deck. This one, however, it is very flimsy. It is very thin. The finish on the cardstock is I would say semi-gloss. It does catch the light, but not too much. Having said that, I know that it depends on our preferences, and so I'm not going to say anything positive or negative about the cardstocks. Personally, I prefer this one because I really like the tactile feel of the linen finish to it, and I know that this one is my least favorite. However, I also know that this is the easiest one to shuffle because it's the one that bends more. So obviously, you'll have to take that into consideration, even though the sizes are different. So starting again, sorry about that. So we'll have the full, we've seen the full, then we're looking at the Magician. Obviously, we're looking at the Tanuki when it comes to both the Yokai Yochi and the Yokai Tarot. This is a completely different yokai, very scary at that. The Tanuki is a trickster. So obviously, if you're familiar with this yokai, the Tanuki is always a trickster, which can be seen as an impersonification of the Magician. Then we have a similar one. This is also the Yuki Onna, but this is very scary. So this is the story of the woman with a really long neck, and sometimes the neck can actually separate the head from the body. And at night, so during the day they have the semblance of a normal woman, but at night they will actually venture outdoors and they will trick men. Sometimes we're looking at very dangerous yokai. Sometimes they're more like whimsical yokai. Sometimes they're very powerful and actually beneficial yokai. So some of these yokais bring a lot of luck. So we've got the kitsune, of course, a bit, the kitsune within the emperor and the empress in the yokai yochi is very beautiful because this is the marriage of the kitsune. So it's a very interesting emperor and empress and emperor. When it comes to these other decks, we don't necessarily have that match because this is the Empress and the Emperor. This is the dragon. I believe it's the God Dragon. Sorry. And this one I honestly don't remember, but it looks to me like it's one of the warriors. And then we are looking at the. So this is an echo because obviously you can see the semblance of a cat. It is a cat, but it's a shapeshifter. And this is a really interesting take on the Hierophant in the sense that whenever there is a shapeshifting neko, so a shapeshifting cat, it always brings an omen or a knowledge of something that we need to confront ourselves with. So I really like that they've taken this one for the Hierophant. And then we're moving on to the Lovers. I honestly, this is the marriage of the kitsune. It's a very beautiful story. It is common belief that when there is a shower, for example, it is because there is a wedding and of the kitsune, and they make it rain because they don't want humans to disturb them when they're in the woods and having the ceremony. So there is a really beautiful story. However, this is an even more beautiful story. This is reminding us of all of the tragedies that happened at sea, and these are the skeleton of the sailors that get lost at sea. And obviously there is this sense of mourning. You will notice that in many cases, yokais have become part of a tradition and folklore because they want to explain tragedy, any kind of tragedy. And sometimes it's the human willingness to accept something even when it's too tragic to accept, and creating the myth around it and justifying that by, creating these beings, these supernatural beings, that they've taken someone away from them. They have been luring sometimes a spouse that got lost in the woods, or they have been luring a sailman that got lost at sea. So it's a really beautiful, although sometimes even heartbreaking, origin to many of these yokais. Then we've got the Chariot, obviously really scary story behind this Chariot here. As I said, I honestly, I cannot go through all of them because this is going to be an incredibly long video in any case. but you will be able to find a lot of information online. And also, if you do acquire any of these decks, so you will be able to find some information about them as well. The Wheel of Fortune, of course, very different kind of representation when it comes to these three decks. And obviously, it really depends on how you like your decks, because this here is, let me just tell you that this one, for example, shows Justice. For number 8, whereas the Los Carabao deck and the Nui Nui deck show Justice at number 11. So this is Justice, which is actually very similar. This is the same yokai presented in these two, and this is the lion that is actually representing the Strength card. And then moving on, we've got the Hanged One or the Hangman. And again, you know, this is very different. All of these three are very different. This one is a hanging horse or part of a horse, as you can see, and it's actually hanging from the branches of a tree, and sometimes it will just drop on top of a traveler. So there is this idea of hanging for sure. But when I was talking about these decks with my members, we were actually taking into consideration the actual meaning of the cards, and it looks like the yokai Yochi is merely focusing on the appearances of the yokais and making the connection between the appearance of a yokai and a card that could represent, and not necessarily the meaning of the card. Because as you can imagine, the Hanged One, when it comes to the meaning of the Hanged One, is changing our perspective, but also self-sacrifice, or, you know, looking at things in a different way, or even taking a break and meditating and trying to look at things in a different way. And this one is obviously not a yokai that will respond to that meaning of the card, even though it looks literally like something that is hanging from a tree. So what do we actually prefer? Do we prefer an image in a tarot deck that is showing us the meaning of the card, or do we prefer something that is less related to the meaning but is actually more representing the visualization of the name or the title of the card itself? Since this one, for example, is the Kappa. And, you know, there is always this sense of moving the water between one cup and the other. However, the kappa itself is a very whimsical, but also a kind of a trickster kind of yokai. And it's not necessarily related to the meaning of the temperance card, which is always pointing to the passing of time. And also this sometimes is also related to health of a person, but communication, for example. So it's up to you whether you prefer to look at a tarot deck or the images of a modern tarot deck or a niche tarot deck or something different from the RWS in a way or another. And I have to say that I do have my conclusion. I did, you know, talk about it with my members, and we seem to all agree that at the end of the day, when we want to read a tarot deck, then we'll always prefer a tarot deck that shows you the meaning incorporated with the image. But when you want a collectible item, in that case, you always want to stick with something that is indeed a collectible item, like a Yokai Yochi, which is unfortunately out of print and probably not going to be reprinted. Very hard to find. You will see that in this case, it's still pointing to the rabbit on the moon. So this is actually a Japanese tradition that has been imported into Japan. When looking at the moon, we can recognize the shape of a rabbit. And moving on, we've got a very similar image when it comes to the crows on the sun in these two cases, and a completely different one when it comes to the Yokai Tarot from Los Carabao. Again, it really is a matter of preferences. The Judgment card is very apt. Actually, it's very similar to the meaning that we assign to the weighing in Japanese mythology, the weighing of the heart. So when you put everything on a balance, the things that you did right and the things that you did wrong, and you will only be able to be granted eternal life if what you do right has more weight than what you did wrong. So this is actually very interesting because it's a very similar kind of yokai, very similar to the Egyptian mythology, and this is very similar as well. It's actually the same. When it comes to this one, it's a completely different one. But as I said, it doesn't matter. It's always something related to our preferences. So we're now moving on to the minors, and I have to say I had to reorganize this one because it was actually starting with the Suto cups. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted to have them all in the same order so we can actually have a look at them. And so we're starting with the Suto ones, of course. And I really keep on saying this, but I really, really love the colors of this version of the Yokai Tarot. I also do like this one for different reasons, obviously. There's a lot to be said when it comes to aesthetics. And by the way, I'm trying to speak as clearly as I can, but there is someone doing a really loud noise outside, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I will try and edit the background noises out when I will edit the video. So bear with me. Sorry about that. If you can still hear the noise outside, I really apologize, but it's been going on for hours. And to be honest with you, I don't know when they're going to stop. So I just decided to go ahead and film this. Okay, so moving on to the 7 and the 8 of Wands, obviously. There is the sense of speed, for example, definitely in the Yokai Tarot by Lo Scarabeo. I don't necessarily see that in the other two, but obviously there are the stories behind that can be very easily accessed. And we're looking at the 9 of Wands. I like the fact that for the 9 of Wands, we have the rabbit on the moon, and there is this sense of communication between the rabbit that is on the ground and the rabbit and the shape of the rabbit on the moon, almost as if it were referring to the fact of looking up and, and understanding that your task is not over yet and you can't rest. And it is pointing to resilience. But I have to say that it's something that we build up on the meaning of the images of the card. It's almost as if we will have to adapt the way in which we read the cards themselves in order to fit the narrative on the cards. And it's not always working. I have to say, it's actually not always working. This is Gozes, this one of the guardians of hell. And for the Knight of Wands, I do realize that it's not the way that we all read it. I mean, personally, I look at the energy of Wands and think about the adventurer when it comes to the archetype of the Knight of Wands, not necessarily of the soldier, which is more an archetype that I recognize for the Knight of Pentacles. But then again, it is something that can be seen as a personal preference, of course. And the Queen of Wands, which is always the archetype of the performer. I like the fact that in this Queen of Wands, we still have the cat. So it is pointing at something that we are very familiar with. But on the other hand, we also see, for example, here, this Queen of Wands looks more like a Queen of Swords because she's brandishing a sword or a katana. But in any case, I don't think that it is possible to produce a Yokai Tarot that is 100% making everyone happy, in the sense that some of us will be more interested in the images, as I said before, and some of us will actually be more interested in the meaning of the cards. So it is a matter of deciding what we want to find in a deck. And the scope and the reason why I'm filming this video is to literally present you with all of the cards that belong to these 3 decks in order for you to make up your mind on what you would like to have, rather one or this one, or if possible, if you can procure that one, the indie edition as well. So we are now looking at the Suto Cups, which is actually quite whimsical when it comes to many of the cards on the Yokai Yochi. And I believe that it actually responds well with let's say, the meaning of the alchemical element of water, which is obviously portrayed in the Suto Cups. Something that we don't necessarily find in the other 2 decks, which present more serious yokais. And then moving on to the 9 of Cups, of course, and the 10 of Cups, and then moving on to the court cards. And as always, there's a lot to be said about a lot of these. By the way, these are not my only yokai decks, but these 3 are the ones that are called yokai. I also have a yokai oracle, which is a French edition. It's called Oracle de Camille et Yokai. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that that oracle will actually be translated in English. So keep an eye out for it. It's called the Oracle of Kami and Yokai. So yokai is, as we say, the supernatural spirit that belongs to Japanese lore, but kami is another word for spirit. And it is believed that kami is the most spiritual side of the Japanese supernatural. So it's more related to a spirit rather than a yokai. It's a very interesting concept that is very difficult to express because we don't necessarily have that in Western culture, believing that objects can actually have a spirit. And when there is an imbalance in the kami, there's also sufferance coming from it. And I know that some of you have actually are Japanese or have been doing studies in Japanese lore and Japanese culture. And so I invite you to obviously write if you want to express anything that you want in the comments below. It will be always very welcome. And it will always be very interesting because I don't have direct knowledge of the yokai. The only things that I know are the ones that are related to the studies that I've done. And this is the suit of swords. Obviously, you will remember this one. So sometimes we see this in a different suit. So these are the fires. These fires are supernatural fires that you can find sometimes in a forest, and they are produced by the kitsune. And this was the same card that we've seen, for example, in the Seven of Cups in the Yokai Yochi. And it is very interesting sometimes to see that the creators of these decks are actually portraying the same kind of yokai, or at least the same kind of situation for different cards. And the Ten of Swords, of course. And we're also moving on to the core cards that pertain to the Suit of Swords. These ones are very interesting as well. Very interesting story. There's a lot of stories related to yokai that live in the sea, for example, because obviously in Japan is an archipelago. It's got I believe hundreds of islands. I could be mistaken, but a lot of islands in any case. And it's always interesting to see that the lore, the folklore, the local folklore is always looking at the sea as something that on the one hand, it provides them with a living because obviously there's a lot of sailmen and fishermen. But on the other hand, because it's a natural power, it's also destructive. And think about the tsunami, for example, and the ways in which the tsunami has been portrayed by Japanese artists such as Hokusai, for example. That is the most famous portrait of a tsunami. And I really love, for example, those portraits of the ocean, that the way in which it has been embodied into art coming from Japan. And we're moving on to now the suit of Pentacles, of course. And it is, all of them are very beautiful. Some of them, I have to say, for example, some of them are very heartbreaking. And it makes sense, of course, it makes sense because the cards themselves ask for a heartbreaking interpretation of the cards. So Seven of Coins, of course, and moving on to the last cards of a tarot deck. I'm loving this Nine of Coins because we've got a kitty cat in there, which is really cute. And we're moving on to the Ten of Coins. In the Ten of Coins, for example, this yokai is one of the most important ones. It is almost as if it were the king of the yokais, and it's got the shape of, it's a shapeshifter, and it can take the shape of a really old man that, comes into your house and eats and drinks, and then it disappears. And you cannot say anything because obviously it is one of the most powerful yokai, and as a matter of fact, it says that it can command, it can order your other yokais of a lower rank. And so it also actually brings good luck. So it is referred to the Ten of Coins in such a way. And we got, again, the Kitsune. We've got the Onna with the really long neck that we were seeing for the Yokai Yochi, portraying the High Priestess, for example. But in this case, is portraying the Page of Coins. And then we got the Knight of Coins and the Queen. And last but not least, we also have the King of Coins. There you go. So I hope that this video was helpful. As I was explaining, this video was not meant to enrich your knowledge into the world of yokai, I could definitely do that. And as I said, I did do that for some of the yokais in the Yokai Tarot in an old video. So I will make sure to put it in the description box below. But this video had the purpose of showing you 3 decks that are portraying yokai and the Japanese lore and supernatural, just in case you want to reach out for one of these decks. And I'm also pointing out, if you just skip ahead or something, I wanted to point out that at the beginning of the video, I also talk about the amount of information that you can find for each and every one of these decks present in the books, because that is, I believe, very important as well, especially if you want to know something more about these yokais. We've talked about the aesthetics. I personally like 3 of them. Probably when it comes to the colors, this one is my favorite, obviously. But when it comes to the cardstock, this one is my favorite. But when it comes to the combination of the 2, perhaps this one is my favorite. So I'm obviously going to keep all 3 of them because I really love them. In any case, let me know in the comments below what you think about these 3 decks. And if you have something to add, it's always very well accepted, as long as it's friendly and respectful, because this is a safe space for everyone. In any case, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.